Remedy Entertainment is best known for their work on the first two Max Payne games, and rightfully so. Max Payne 1 successfully combined a noir detective story and Chinese action film gunplay into one of the most prolific games in its genre. What seems cliché now, with the hard-boiled detective going out for revenge after seeing his family killed, was still a fresh enough concept back in 2001. While the player never gets to directly spend time with Max's family, you learn about them throughout the game. You see how much Max loved them, and you witness how far he's willing to go to bring their killers to justice. Maybe not justice through the legal system, but it is his justice nonetheless. Seeing all of this retroactively gives the opening scenes of the game more impact than it probably initially had for most players. It makes us care for characters who are already gone, and makes us root for the last one left alive. In a game with so much killing, it's quite impressive to make the player care about two deaths that, in lesser games, would have served as shallow character motivation that never gets fully explored further than that opening scene. Max's path to vengeance leads him across city blocks, through warehouses, subway tunnels, and even through some nightmare sequences. All of these levels are designed to put the player into challenging combat scenarios in which their understanding of the movement and bullet time mechanics are put to the test. Only a few bullets can kill you, but the same goes for your enemies, and you quite literally have time on your side. You're able to activate bullet time, a mode where time slows down, allowing you to take precise shots rather than spraying and praying. Your bullet time isn't unlimited though, and is measured by a meter on the screen. In addition to this, you have access to a shoot-dodge move, where Max will dive in the direction you choose and enable bullet time even if you are completely out, and it stays active until Max hits the ground. The combination of these two elements allow the player to navigate fights in a way that no other game had done at that time. Remedy would further expand upon these concepts in Max Payne 2: The Fall of Max Payne. The story acts as closure for both Max and the player, and several gameplay changes were made, such as allowing the player to play as a new character, Mona Sachs. For all intents and purposes, this was going to be Remedy's last game with the franchise, and they spared no expense in creating it. Real actors were introduced to portray characters in-game, rather than people from the studio, such as how Sam Lake was the model for Max in the first game. The quality of all sound effects and voice lines were improved, and there were more in-game cutscenes as well as better-looking comic book scenes. Not only that, but there were multiple endings to the game, encouraging replayability to access the new story content. This was the best late goodbye that Remedy could have given the franchise that put them on the map. Remedy's next big project would be a partnership between themselves and Microsoft, and the resulting game was Alan Wake, one of my personal favorite games of all time. The game takes place in a rural American town where the famous author Alan Wake and his wife Alice have come to relax and hopefully clear up Alan's case of writer's block. Without spoiling too much of the plot, something is not quite right in the town, and Alice ends up getting kidnapped by the darkness, sending Alan on a quest to save her at any cost. The game wastes no time in making the player feel unnerved, as the tutorial itself takes place in a nightmare sequence that foreshadows what is to come. Throughout the game, the player will find manuscript pages from a book that Alan doesn't remember writing, and you will have to use that knowledge along with different light sources and firearms to fight back against the darkness. These light sources range from your basic flashlight all the way to flares and flashbang grenades, accompanied by a standard arsenal of revolvers, rifles, and shotguns. This puts a twist on typical third-person shooter mechanics, where the player now has to break an enemy's shield of darkness with a light source before they can actually shoot at them and cause damage. Unfortunately, a full-fledged sequel to Alan Wake never happened, but we were given a shorter Xbox Live Arcade title in the form of Alan Wake's American Nightmare. Several elements from the cancelled Alan Wake 2 can be seen here, such as the American Southwest setting and the main antagonist of Mr. Scratch. While American Nightmare was received poorly in comparison to the original title, it still delivered more of the same gameplay, added a new challenge mode, and wrapped up the loose story threads from the first game, all in one bite-sized package. Remedy would continue their partnership with Microsoft in 2016 with the release of Quantum Break. You play as Jack Joyce, who is visiting an old friend and colleague, Paul Serene. When a time travel experiment goes terribly wrong, both characters are given powers that allow them to manipulate time. A version of Paul from the future appears and is quickly revealed to be the main antagonist. This becomes an early driving force in the game as players want to discover how Paul became the villain. A story rooted in the concept of altering time allows a degree of creative freedom not found in other genres of storytelling. This means that the player is able to make story decisions which directly impact the gameplay, in-game cutscenes, and even the game's accompanying television show. No one element leans too heavily on the other, creating a cohesive narrative that is weaved throughout wholly different mediums. As far as gameplay goes in Quantum Break, the bullet time mechanic from Max Payne is expanded on tenfold here, and the story being based around time travel gives the powers a plausibility within the rules of its own world. You have several different abilities at your disposal, such as Time Stop, Time Shield, Time Rush, and others. You aren't relegated to using only one of your powers at a time either. The game encourages you to combine different powers along with your arsenal of weapons. As the game goes on, you face increasingly difficult enemies, and even some that can completely negate certain powers of yours, forcing you to change up your tactics. This helps keep combat fresh over the course of the campaign. Quantum Break offers an entertainment experience that is stretched across gameplay, in-game cutscenes, and even its own television show. A lesser product would have failed to deliver in at least one, if not all of those aspects, but Remedy successfully pulled off each of them. Remedy's newest game, Control, released to incredibly positive reviews, and it's not hard to see why. With phenomenal graphics, engaging gameplay, and one hell of a story, Control exemplifies all of Remedy's best qualities as a developer. You play as Jessie Faden, who, in the search for her brother, ends up at the Federal Bureau of Control. The FBC is a United States government agency dedicated to investigating Altered World Events, or AWEs, which are events that ignore the rules of our own reality. Without spoiling too much of the opening plot, Jessie finds that the current director of the FBC has killed himself with the service weapon, a pistol that the player will be using throughout the gameplay of Control, and that the building is under invasion from otherworldly beings known as the Hiss. What I particularly love about this plot is how it ties other Remedy games into the universe of Control, with suggestions that the events of Alan Wake could be considered one of the numerous Altered World events under investigation by the FBC. It's things like this that give me hope for a dedicated sequel in the future, but at the very least it shows how much Remedy cares about the stories and worlds that they create. Gameplay in Control consists of players using the aforementioned service weapon, which can transform itself and help the player adapt as combat scenarios progress. In addition to the service weapon transforming, Jessie herself transforms over the course of the campaign as she unlocks different powers for traversal and combat. For example, Jessie will unlock 2 paranatural powers by default if players opt to barrel through the main story, but there are 3 others defined which drastically alter how combat plays out. Launch allows players to take advantage of the physics engine of the game, breaking apart objects and hurling the debris at enemies. Evade adds a dash move, allowing Jessie to weave through combat arenas and avoid attacks. Shield is pretty self-explanatory, giving players an option to protect themselves from incoming fire. These next 2 powers, in my opinion, offer the most significant changes to the gameplay. Levitate makes Jessie fly, giving players extreme maneuverability around their environment, aiding in both combat and exploration. Finally, there is Seize, which can turn certain enemies against each other for a short duration. The combination of all these elements and the sheer level of customization available to your playstyle creates the best combat system Remedy has created since the first 2 Max Payne games. This isn't a studio that has undergone massive changes in leadership or had key members of the team leave unceremoniously mid-development. The developers at Remedy all share one collective vision for the projects they work on, and it shows. This is a development studio that isn't afraid to take risks with their narratives or their gameplay. They constantly want to shake up the formula with their next game, which is not something you see many AAA studios do these days. Sure, the indie market is comprised almost entirely of risk takers and creatives who like to switch things up, but none of that is on the same level as Remedy, who has a lot more to lose should they make a mistake. They are incredibly dedicated, unwavering in their creativity, and unbelievably talented. Control shows that a modern AAA studio is still truly passionate about their work, that single-player, narrative-driven games can thrive in the predominantly live service landscape, and that excessive crunch isn't needed to launch a good game. If nothing else, Control is amazing.